Hello everyone, and many thanks for the opportunity to present to you today. This session builds upon the session Sean completed. My name is Aidan Mc Carthy, and I'm a Principal, Schools Digital Transformation and Strategy Lead for Microsoft Education. I would like to say thank you as our Microsoft Education team has shared so many amazing Filipino stories of the innovation and the way teachers have embraced the challenges to ensure learning continues for students. The incredible work of schools and teachers is a reason for celebration. The creativity, the collaboration between students and teachers, and the passion we see in so many videos and social messaging platforms is something to be proud of. This presentation is a focus on how we rise to the challenge with ideas to lead and transform schools during these unique times. I had a title to today called Change Journey, as our COVID-19 experiences must impact future strategies and journeys. As we look to transition from a remote learning, what worked, what didn't, what happens now, and what should happen? Learnings from the COVID-19 crisis give us an opportunity to reimagine what schooling means moving forward. How does it change our education vision? And how can we redefine schools and schooling? How can we reconsider the role of digital transformation and the decisions we make on leadership, people, experiences, and technology? How can we enable effective contemporary and connected learning communities to support physical and virtual spaces? This session is a conversation on a new normal that reflects on teaching, learning, the importance of leading change, and how our views of schooling may have changed. COVID-19 has turned all our lives upside down, and the education journey we had for and in our schools, our classrooms a year ago, see us living in a very changed journey. Our change journey has already begun, and we're seeing this every day, but it's accelerated these past 3 months. It has impacted every part of our society and created new opportunities. I'm sure all of us have learnt new skills and leveraged digital in ways that are new, confronting, but also allowed us time to reflect on how we use this moving forward as a new normal begins with our transitioning back into schools and into classrooms. The world of work has significantly changed, and the trends in the workplace have seen the need for less travel, more virtual working, working from home, greater flexibility. This has reset conversations for many employers in, do we need all the office space for our employees? Can working from home be the new normal for many jobs? What does it mean for education? Educators, we have all seen learning shift beyond the classroom. This was challenging for teachers, for students, and for parents. How we did attendance, assessment, consider student well-being. So what does this mean moving forward? How might we envision digital learning for our younger students, middle years, and students preparing to graduate? We have an opportunity to reflect from a pedagogical and education perspective, and who is influencing how learners acquire knowledge. This concept is called the parameters of influence. Our students are learning from the experience we provide in our schools, the community they belong to at school, and outside as well, and the platform we provide to allow them to access, to share, and collaborate. How we did it when we were face-to-face, how we were doing it during remote learning, how do those two come together? As we consider the learning experience, we also think about how students are acquiring knowledge. These experiences can be classified in terms of the amount of control the student has over their learning and the nature of it. Expository instruction, active learning, or interactive learning. Thinking about how inquiry-based is about supporting and how digital technologies can enable it, particularly when we may not always be in the classroom. So as we start to think about these different experiences, we're also thinking about how much of what we present to students is synchronous and how much of it is asynchronous. Having students online with a teacher for every minute may not be the best learning or teaching experience when we're teaching virtually, and considering the face-to-face alternatives and enhancements provide opportunities to do things differently. We now have a very real and very recent understanding of how both of those options work, and we can also see the benefits and also the difficulties in having just one or the other. In essence, we want to see post-COVID-19 the opportunities for blended learning in all our schools. In the middle, which creates the significant conversations or perspectives in how we view curriculum, assessment, school operations, professional learning, and the activities that support the whole child development, including academic and social well-being. All of these have opportunities for us to be able to transform in how we do our activities today. How we think about how long a school day should be, how often a student should be at school, how often a student could be learning with fully online programs or within blended courses. All of these are now real opportunities, and we have experience now in thinking about it. This week, the Journal of Technology and Teacher Education released 35 published articles, and they consider the impact of remote learning, and they may assist you in the discussions with your school community as you start to think about how this may all come together. But one of the critical pieces about all of this is that transformation is actually always about people, and the people about how that change is going to occur. So what I want to do now is to share with you what the research is telling us about transformation, people, and change. We are in the middle of digital transformation in education. We bring with us all of the great qualities and great experiences of face-to-face and using teacher-facilitated learning. But we're now starting to bring in the opportunities of all these different tool sets that can support us in that process. But the issue we have with all of these is that there's simply the sheer number of tools teachers and students have been using. And also then the challenge of how do we bring them all together to ensure we capture all the capabilities to ensure best practices occur, learning is happening, we can monitor, we can describe it, we can find out, which students are doing better than others, and which students are actually, having well-being issues, okay, as they start to consider that as well. We need to understand about how learning is really happening, and we need to know about it. And that's where part of this whole concept of last mile about how do we redesign our systems to be able to capture the value of all of these tools and making sure that these tools are delivering for the different age groups and for teachers that are enabling those learners as well. When we look at digital transformation in every industry, not just education, we see pitfalls and practices for success. Often we see a whole range of different things that needs to be understood first. And a lot of that is to do with the communication, the messaging, really understanding why this change is occurring. And a lot of this is about removing perceptions and fuzzy definitions. It's about thinking about what does digital transformation in education mean for our system, our school. Understanding what are the new costs that need to be incurred, what efficiencies or reductions will occur with that too. Thinking about devices for students. And cheap devices may limit the learning potential. And so how we think about understanding that. Best practices also include things like creating a technology roadmap, including and having the middle leadership in schools be the critical advocates of change, but also the drivers of change as well. And infrastructure for today and tomorrow. Data governance and expectations. Who should have access? Privacy, security. What should a parent see? What should a student see? All of these are part of the we need to know sort of scenarios, and a culture that we build around that to understand what does digital mean and how this is going to really support, the expectations that we have. COVID-19 has for many of us helped us understand why it is important in education and the opportunities that digital also brings. Recently, I completed my doctorate and a paper waiting to be published on this topic. In reviewing over 75 different digital transformation frameworks from education systems, consulting firms, and companies that provide policy and background and research, they all have these four common themes: leadership, people, experience, and technology. I share the most important one today. It's people. Creating a journey to develop the talent in your schools with the human resources software to help you is an absolute must. Helping teachers, brand new teachers that enter your school, what will their career look like in your school or within the system? How will they develop their capabilities, their skills, to become the next head of department or the next school leader? This needs to be built into and have leadership that requires what are the attributes and skills and how do I learn about those? Who can I collaborate with? Who are people within my community that have already been there and experienced it? How can I build upon that? To help in these development of attributes and skills, you need to be able to develop that culture. And leadership requires the insights and the performance that extends for teachers and staff, but also to students as well. Because without understanding everything in that context, most transformations do not succeed. And all of the research clearly shows that. So what you're seeing here is thinking holistically about that strategic plan that you're creating. But each and every one of those is more than just simply an innovation in an area. It's holistically changing everything. In education, it is about changing of the individual, breaking down all of those negatives that go with that. And as you start to think about that transformation, is that integration between people and technology. But more importantly, what we're seeing is that actually that people change is really actually much bigger than the technology change. Everywhere where the technology is bigger than the people change, it usually has not ever delivered on the expectation that it was required to do. So we've probably spent many times as our community thinking about, well, what could transformation look like? And a lot of this hasn't changed. There's spaces that we want to inspire learning, or how do we create personalised learning? How do we skill and equip our teachers? And how do we monitor? But I think what we're seeing now, and with COVID-19 in many respects, is that we've opened up the physical spaces to the virtual spaces. We've also opened up that we may not always be able to see all of the students at the same time. And we're seeing students are collaborating, but it may be not in a physical classroom that we can monitor and manage. And so it's building that sort of face-to-face and that virtual coming together, and it's rethinking what transformation and what school and what schooling actually is. So when we think about a lot of these sort of scenarios, is that this year has seen many schools and communities making change. All over the world, their experiences are different. Many have been successful, many isolated success, and many have not fared well, with much media critical of the education preparedness. So how do organisations manage change? And what does this mean for education? When we think about this change, it could be around one initiative, implementing a brand new curriculum. Or it could be a major digital transformation change where all systems, are being reconfigured, to refocus on what the requirement of the new strategy should be. When we think about change, It is a significant area that happens in most businesses, and most corporations have change teams. They have significant people in these areas. And there's a lot of research in terms of how it works and what it doesn't work, and these cartoon strips offer insights I'm sure you can relate to. In education, we normally bundle up our change as part of professional development. And what I'd like to do is to sort of expand on that. Professional development is simply one component of the overall change process. Change management is about deeply considering the current and future impact you wish to have, identifying those barriers to change, the processes you put in place to ensure success, and how to make that change effective. And then critically then, how this is communicated not only within peers, but your community as well. Knowing what to communicate and who should communicate can be considered from an organisational and for personal reasons. We are changing our curriculum because of this reason, and what it means to me as a middle school science teacher is this. The organisation has a focus, but it needs to also be something that I as a person, I can feel, and this is going to impact me. It may be impacting me positively, and it could also be negatively. If it's negatively, then how are we going to support that person, through that process? What's really interesting with the research around change is things like, well, who should be telling me about the change? And so in here you're seeing is that, the number one change management methodology is from an organisation called ProSci. And when you look at organisational change, they want to hear it from the most senior person in their organisation. It could be a Minister of Education, or it could be someone that's in charge of your system of schools, or it could be your school principal if you're on your own. When it's a personal reason, then I, as an individual, want to hear it from my direct manager, my direct leader, a head of faculty, or a lower primary leader. And if those two get mixed, then what we see is significant changes in terms of impact, but also the buy-in in terms of the change process. Preparing for change, if we had our COVID-19 time again and we were able to prepare, sees leading change that requires not only preparing change for you, but also for your leading staff. This is supported by ProSci's ADCAR model, with awareness of the change, desire, knowledge. We often call this PD and start at this point. Without teachers and staff knowing why we are doing this and what's in it for me. It then looks at ability. I can now use Teams as a product because I've just been trained with all of this knowledge. I've got the know-how, but I need to have the ability to use this to teach effectively. And all of this then is supported with reinforcement to ensure that the change as a leader you're expecting is maintained and develops. Okay, that's a lot. But the journey is structured and the research is deep. How you prepare for change, how you manage the change, and then how you reinforce that change is a whole process. Each one of them has critical steps. And often what we have in our schools is that in our rush to implement something new, we go straight to things like a professional development where suddenly we're reskilling, we're focusing on the knowledge. And so a lot more needs to be considered for successful change and also the journey that people will be going on. This strategy requires a deep focus for different levels within your school, within the system. How that change is managed for system leaders, how it's managed for school leaders and middle management is different again. And then how that's managed for teachers and digital coaches, as an example, if digital transformation has been implemented, are again very different. How this then is then provided to students or to parents comes out of this. And your messaging, your communication, the professional learning opportunities that go with that are all very different. the one-stop shop does not work for effective change. So let me give you an example of a digital transformation between 2016 and 2019 that I led before rejoining Microsoft. And it was and a critical plan was part of our communication and messaging. We gave it a title, a branding. And the goal was to ensure equity for all, and everyone in the school felt they were participating in the transformation. We began with a real deep focus that everyone was an individual that needed to be impacted, and we needed to know as much as we could about every individual to ensure that we had the understanding to make the very, very best decisions, wherever they were. The system that I came from was a Catholic system. And one of the critical things in there was that we needed to make sure our transformation change journey was part of the vision and the mission of the system. Catholic system, it included city and rural and desert schools, over a very, very wide area in Western Australia. The goal was to ensure learning, engagement, accountability, and in this case was discipleship were front and center. And so all of these areas that were strategically part of the mission of our system, we were not only being able to indicate how this is going to support, but also be able to evaluate that we were actually able to do all of these different areas. We started with placing the child in every decision with every platform, dispelling the myth of average. But what we also wanted to do is to make sure is that whatever the change was going to be, it could grow over time. And a student that was beginning their school career, if you wanted to call it that, or their school journey, needed to be at, whether they're in year one or as they were leaving, they needed to feel, okay, they were part of that journey. And so what I wanted to do is to step back and think about, okay, so if we wanted to put that student at the very center, then we needed to do something. And that was about dispelling the myth of average. Often we tend to focus on the average score, the average height, the average class size, the average school building. But what we wanted to do is to also ensure that the goal was to design to the edges so that we had equity. We were also thinking about accessibility. We were thinking about every student, every school, irrelevant in terms of distance, access, financials, whatever that might be. If I was to think about these two people, A and B, which of these do you think would be bigger? The man on the left has got a fairly big stomach, but the other man is much taller. If we look to the average in the middle of these attributes, we see it's got this jaggedness occurring. And in the end, it all depends on, well, what are we measuring? And often what we have in our schools is that we're measuring, a test, or we're measuring, okay, how fast someone ran. And so part of this is that we need to think more than just simply a general particular statement. The same could be as we think about another sort of scenario. So we can ask the same for these two people. Who is smarter? And I'm sure you're all already thinking, well, it all depends on, what you're trying to measure. If we look at the average, it's that jaggedness again. And so one of the things that we need to do is that how do we get enough information about every child? How do we get them out of the systems we use, from what teachers provide, what students provide, what parents are providing? But it's also starting to think about when we're looking at the average and we're looking at pastoral care and the support of the whole child, is that we also need to think about, well, what are the things that may put students at risk? How do we consider well-being? And again, it's looking at, well, what are we measuring in this area, and do we have enough data to really make effective decisions? And our program around Leading Lights was actually built on this. It was about making sure that all of the information that we needed to make decisions was in the one place, so we could then do insights and analytics to make better decisions from teachers, teaching, students, schools, curriculum, assessment, research, whatever it might have been. So when we think about transformation, it means making sure everyone in the community is at the centre and recognising that they are the most important, and the solutions, the technology, the services, all of these begin with what is in it for them. It also means looking at current costs, where we spend our money today, what are the future costs will be. The bubble in the middle is the change budget. Okay, that change between where we are and where we need to be, but more importantly, the case for doing all of this requires a fundamental financial piece as well. And that financial is, how do we sustain this investment? It's about recognizing the complexity and how every application or service that may be sitting in someone's cloud is information about teaching or learning you require for insights. They could be coming from Microsoft apps or Google apps or Apple apps or any other sort of applications, social networking sites, digital resources, websites. The more information of interactions that are happening and not brought back to you, then the less information you have to really be able to provide that question of how do you know. If someone asks, how is that child, academically achieving? How are they socially fitting in? How are they being prepared in terms of, their directions and so forth? Today, too much information is not in that one place. Is complex and even more complex, and that's why often we see in central areas is that we're looking at the top 5% of information. How many students attended school this term, or what were the top results. There's not enough detail to really show what is the impact of what's happening in that school community. So that's why for us it meant it was an opportunity to reset the platform. What we did is we looked at, it was cheaper for us to start again, than it was to simply reuse older applications that just didn't work for us. But it was also important that we critically put all of this into what we called our one cloud, our Siwa cloud. And by having it in that one cloud meant that we could easily then provide access to everyone through mobile phone, right through to other systems in our schools. But it gave us an opportunity to also develop it over time as well, to ensure that we always maintain the latest technologies that industry was getting, but often we weren't. When we thought about all of this then is we wanted to make sure that we were, embedding ourselves in academic research and evidence as well. We looked at, what are the big focus areas that we wanted to do to help create our big why. We wanted to look at, well, how will pedagogies change? What does a digital classroom look like and feel like? What does a digital school look like? And then how do we create systemness within our school, but also if we're part of a school system, how we work between those as well, ensuring that any student that was in our system, as they moved from school to school, or for our teachers when they moved to school, the only thing that changed about all the information that they had was the name of the school, because everything else was in that big cloud and moved with them. So when we think about all of these, then one of the critical areas that we looked at was to what we called is a hero brochure. It highlighted in a document our outcomes and our timelines, outlining the why we were making this transformational change and how it actually impacted everyone. Leading lights for us was meant to rethink all of our systems and create one integrated, secure platform with built-in duty of care that could manage the identity of every user. As they move, everything flows with them. These were our 6 core projects, and we broke them down so that people could understand it. The first one is around not just the username and password, but everything that they would need to know. The second one was we implemented, Office 365. And we wanted to make sure that became our communication, our collaboration, our content hub. But it was also how we integrated with other systems as well. We developed a major insights as well from analytics and looking at AI in terms of recommendation engines and so forth. Curiosity Academy in this case was about how and where we stored all of our digital content, our resources, our professional development materials, our textbooks, our resources, to be able to allow one teacher that may have been 2,000 kilometres away from another teacher could actually access that resource and share it and build upon it and be able to utilise in their own classrooms. A critical area that we saw was also re-looking at the administration system, how we did attendance, how parents provided their information, how they got information about how their child was going, right through to information about the school and buildings and everything else. And the most important one that we developed with all of our projects was a place to celebrate. Throughout all of these is that as great things were occurring, we had an opportunity to share and celebrate, and I've seen a lot of that certainly in the Philippines and a lot of the work that's been happening over the last 12 months. How did we get there? Really, it's a process. We have to start somewhere where it's about thinking about this change journey from how stakeholders are engaged to what the change process will be, through to looking at, well, what are the scenarios we're trying to create now? And one of the things that we did is we actually built a virtual school, because that was one of the, the most easiest ways of making sure there was equity. A student that was in a desert school who couldn't be, in a school that basically provided all of the subject that they needed to do, could access another school, many, thousands of kilometers away, but being able to participate. It was a scenario for us. You may have your own scenarios, but we created, what is the journey going to look like? How will it be different for a teacher or a student or a parent? Blueprints that were technology blueprints and how the technology linked into these scenarios and journeys. Architecture about what it's going to look like, so the developers knew what to do. The experience we wanted people to have. Is it on a mobile phone? Is it on a laptop? What will that experience? Is it in a website? But all the way having that user feedback as well. Think about all of this is that we're also thinking about the journey that people are going to be on. And so how it starts, and then going from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, what we wanted to do is to open. And so what we wanted to do is to really think about, what will be that day in the life. And so, these are really big, digital documents, but also big graphical documents that, would be plastered on a staff room wall to show how these new technologies are going to be able to help them and what it's actually going to mean. Same as for a teacher. We also created one for parents and students and others as well. As they were going through these sorts of scenarios, it needed to feel personal. How is this going to impact me? And as you start to think about these sorts of areas, you need to also create, what is this going to mean in terms of what we would call the playbooks? Just like, American football or, or basketball and so forth, is that each of the different stakeholders had their own complete guide, from the how-tos, the whys, examples, videos, stories from other teachers in terms of how they actually implemented. All of these things were in there that really help people in terms of the change process. A lot of these activities to face, but a lot of activities was using, guides like I was just shown, but also in the context of teams as well. It became our one technology that we really focused on within 365 to be that central hub where all these other services came to be, that allowed us to integrate other applications and be that one-stop shop for teaching, professional development, and also our experiences have seen a number of articles published, including a model to implement teams as the core communication, collaboration, content, and learning delivery application. We were able to build in a lot of analytics that were in here too, just to see how people were collaborating and where. And we found that initially, all of our rural schools were collaborating far more often than our city-based schools. And then over time, it started to build out and develop as well. These guides then were placed in our classrooms as well, and they're about quick guides, how to get started. And so you're looking at different means, we were using Twitter, we were using, Yammer, we were using Teams, we were creating and printing stuff as well, but using whatever the avenues were to engage people where they are, as opposed to trying to do a one size fits all in that scenario. For our school leaders, we're also then creating a lot of leaders resource kits, how to think about the change journey for their school. It was also looking at what are the resources and what are the surveys and what are the other tools that you can provide to really understand where your organisation is today, how preparedness they are, what their perceptions are in terms of, previous change or technologies, and then how can they actually move forward. So part of this then is to create these simple tools and help people over that journey. And part of that helping them over the journey is graphical and simple representations of that journey. And then for each school, the process to adoption, what's going to happen? All of these sorts of things become simple, but at the same time, if they're not there, it leaves, many people wondering, well, what's going to happen? When is it going to happen? Do I have to be involved in that process? And so we want everyone to be, very much in that area. Okay, that was a story. Okay, and that's a successfully deployed and implemented story. Lots of research, lots of evidence, lots of case studies written about it. There's a lot there that you may, find that you could use, and there's others that you would do differently. And that's about how you build out your change program and that engagement in that type of process. So when I think about this getting started then, it's a recommendation in a way for your change story. And in a way, what we want to do is to think about if there's two things that you wanted to do is one is about building out your change management strategy and mapping it. Okay, how it's going to be implementing and impacting everyone, and then build your hero brochure. Your hero brochure is like a line in the sand. This is where we were, this is where we are, this is where we're moving forward. People can see, okay, what that end is going to look like. And so part of your hero brochure is to provide a lot of resources in terms of how learning will be different, how teaching will be different, how our community may be operating differently as well. And I think the whole COVID-19 has been a really good example of difference. And it's going to be something of a significant change strategy story and a journey that you can have with your community now. And there's going to be so many great learnings and also missteps. And so how do we manage those missteps or look at, things that we wouldn't do again? We need to create big, bold statements, okay? Something that we're going to hang on to. And as part of that is that we want to make sure every participant feels they're part of that journey and being able to articulate what it's going to mean for them as well. It's thinking about giving the detail, but not too much detail. These deeper details will come later. But part of it is to know that they are on a journey, and we're not just innovating in many cases, we're actually transforming, because everything you do will impact many, many other parts of your school and school system. So when we think about all of this session was a conversation, and it was a reflection on the opportunities. In many parts is that you have an opportunity of creating a new normal. And that new normal can be on teaching, on learning, and the importance of leading change. And to consider your views in terms of what schooling may have actually changed. The great thing about COVID-19 crisis, if you can call it that, is that it has provided an opportunity to reimagine what schooling means moving forward. I pose questions such as, what if we did not have the concept of school? How do we think about school? If we think about all of the learnings over the last 3 to 4 months, does teacher recruitment change? Is the expectations we have of teachers change? Can we reimagine schools, schooling and spaces? The expectations of how many hours a day a teacher or a student is at school. We see so much research at the moment that, many, students in their final years of schooling, are struggling, okay, to get up early in the morning to go to school. Their whole way of requiring sleep and staying and working much later, they're far more higher performers starting later on in the day. And so we're seeing a lot of education systems now for secondary students starting the day later. Not only do we have that opportunity, but we've also got opportunities to think about, well, how many hours does a student need to be face-to-face in a school compared to being able to do that either within another part of the school to be able to work on other areas, such as being able to do some online learning or doing revision type areas. And it may be one teacher can be managing, 60 or 70 students who are operating in this particular way and providing as a tutor or a support mechanism. All of these sorts of questions, okay, give us opportunities to rethink. And it also gets us to think about, well, all of this, digital content and resources that we have, how do we centralize that? How do we rethink our professional learning? Is it a one-size-fits-all, or do we really understand what is it that teachers require this term or this semester or this year? And how do we make sure that we know? What you've seen over the course of this session is really about that conversation, about reconsidering and rethinking, but building in whatever that change is, a change management strategy that goes with that. So thank you for the opportunity to be able to present to you today, and good luck on your change journey.